Okay, I think we will begin. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Evolution of Payment Specifications and Tokenization. This webinar is being brought to you jointly by the Smart Card Alliance and EMVCo. And this is the second in a series of webinars that we've recently produced together. And the subject of today's discussion is going to focus on tokenization and its adoption in the marketplace. Next slide, please. So my name is Randy Vanderhoof. I am the Executive Director of the Smart Card Alliance and the EMV Migration Forum. We are industry associations representing the marketplace with efforts to try to raise awareness and build adoption of secure chip technology, and specifically addressing the adoption of chip technology in the payment space utilizing the EMV specifications in the United States. I'm going to be joined today by Clinton Allen, who is with American Express and also serves as the chair of the EMVCo Tokenization Work Group. Next slide. So I'm going to give a brief introduction about tokenization as a layered security approach to payments, and then I'm going to turn things over to Clinton, who's going to provide for a much more detailed and comprehensive look at tokenization from the EMVCo perspective and share with you some of the changes that go with tokenization in terms of further adoption into the payments ecosystem. Next slide. So mitigating fraud losses is not a single layered approach. It requires securing multiple layers of the payments ecosystem to be effective. And without a single technology that does it all, a comprehensive fraud minimalization strategy uses multiple technologies that together provide comprehensive coverage across the marketplace. The EMV chip technology is useful in preventing counterfeit card fraud use at in-store retailers and is based on existing global security specifications managed by EMVCo that ensures security while maintaining global acceptance. Encryption technology secures the entry points in retail point-of-sale systems and the merchant acquirer network where card data is processed and stored, protecting static magnetic stripe data, which is still common, and chip card data, both of which are mainly transmitted and processed in the clear unless encryption is added. Tokenization, which is the subject of this webinar, is an important new layer to the fraud-fighting toolbox. It replaces the account holder's PAN data, which is the personal account number, within specific use cases which are where an alternate number is either used at the source which the issuer issues or within the payment system after the transaction occurs. And today we're going to focus attention on this important new payment security technology and how the ecosystem must evolve to incorporate tokenization. Next slide. So tokenization is a replacement of the card's account number with an alternate card number that is used in the transaction process. There are still multiple definitions of tokens and methodology for their generation. For example, a token requester like a mobile wallet application such as Apple Pay or Android Pay would have a token generated at the issuer level who manages the underlying PAN, and a token of the PAN further upstream in the transaction flow may be generated by the merchant or the acquirer system. Tokens can have additional attributes assigned to them, which limits where they may be used and when they can be used, or even how long they're valid for use, and perhaps even how many times that token can be used. The security benefit derived from tokens are that these attributes make tokens less valuable if stolen, because there may be opportunities to grab the token value, but it might not be easy or even possible to use it to make a fraudulent transaction, particularly with additional attributes linked to that tokenized value. Next slide. So here are some examples of different types of tokens that are in the markets. Acquirer tokens, which are sometimes called security tokens because they're not used to authenticate a payment transaction, but rather to secure the original PAN within the acquirer or merchant domain. Payment tokens substitute for the PAN throughout the entire transaction process and originate from a token service provider acting on behalf of the issuer and the token requester. Issuer tokens are virtual card numbers which are used everywhere that the originating PAN would have been used and are linked by an issuer to an account number only known by the issuer. Next slide. So these are some examples of use cases of tokens that we're seeing in the market today. So mobile contactless transactions where a payment device or a payment instrument rather is stored on a mobile device and used at contactless payment terminals is now being proliferated throughout the United States and in other parts of the world. Apple Pay and Android Pay and more recently Samsung Pay are examples of a mobile contactless transaction that utilizes tokens. Mobile remote payment transactions are where the token is stored in the mobile device and is used for an in-app or an e-commerce transaction rather than transmitting that token value to a physical point-of-sale system. And then there are e-commerce or card-on-file merchants that use tokens to replace stored customer PANs. So rather than keep a full account number on file that could potentially be at risk, those account numbers are replaced with tokens so that they're less vulnerable to theft or reuse. And then there are other use cases for tokens, such as use for merchants that are tied to applications like loyalty or for managing returns within their own point-of-sale system environment. Next slide, please. So what does tokenization hope to solve? Well, the big problem that we're trying to solve for today and for the future is the distribution of a static PAN in multiple payments devices and e-commerce domains. So going back 20 years ago, cards were the only place where PANs were stored and used to transact. Then online shopping began to grow and people were entering their PAN at online merchants, so now the PAN needed to be protected in two domains. Soon, consumers and merchants were storing and holding card PANs on file, and then when NFC came around, people were storing them on mobile devices as well. Today, we have an exploding array of places where PANs are used and stored, which magnifies the risk if one of those places are compromised, causing all of the other uses needing to be of that PAN value needing to be replaced as well. Consumers have more control for where and how they use their card data today, which makes managing consistent security levels across all of their choices more difficult and puts issuers at greater risk. Even when a new use case, such as Apple Pay, comes along with added security features like biometrics that brings even higher levels of authentication, the added security could be lost if that same payment data can be exposed somewhere else in the ecosystem. And updating and replacing PANs for online card-on-file accounts has become a major pain point for consumers and merchants alike. Next slide. So this chart represents what the layering of EMV chip card technology and tokenization create at different fraud levels and protection for different types of theft. And if you look at the first column, these are the types of fraud that we're commonly seeing in the market and trying to prevent in the future. And that fraud may be different in a card-present transaction as well as a card-not-present transaction. So for example, counterfeit cards, EMV chip technology strongly addresses the counterfeit card technology in a card-present transaction by replacing the static account data with unique cryptogram or dynamic data that prevents the card data from being copied, cloned, and used again. But EMV chip technology does not have a direct impact on the card-not-present transactions. EMV chip technology can also address lost and stolen card use if EMV chip plus PIN is used, because it brings the added stronger CVM value that PIN offers to the same dynamic cryptogram functionality that exists in the EMV chip card, but again, isn't going to help much in a card-not-present environment. In terms of prevention of lost and stolen data, the mobile token or tokenization can address both card-present and card-not-present transactions, because the specific or limited use token is present in place of the PAN data, and therefore will be less valuable if stolen either in a card-present environment or card-not-present environment. And then we have to manage theft of data at rest as well as in transit. And again, the use of tokens, particularly in a mobile environment, rather than the PAN data, goes a long way for managing security of theft that is being transmitted between parties, as well as data that is stored either locally at the merchant site or throughout the payments ecosystem. So having a combination of EMV chip technology and tokenization addresses all of the main areas where fraud is prevalent today, and it applies it differently depending on the card present and card not present environment. Next slide, please. So to summarize my intro and to reiterate what we see as the best practices for payment security is to maintain a layered approach. And the first step in that approach is to complete the migration to EMV chip cards so that we can remove static PANs from cards and have that replaced by dynamic authentication data in the card-present environment. Secondly, we can protect the data at rest and the data in transit through the payment process in both card-present and card-not-present environments using both encryption technology and new tokenization technology. And in addition, using tokens would remove sensitive payment data present across multiple domains and isolate where and when the payment data can be used. And finally, to wrap the entire transaction environment in the secure IT best practices, such as those that have been outlined and prescribed in the PCI security standards. Next slide, please. So with that, let me hand off the presentation to Clinton Allen, who's going to go into more detail about payment tokenization. Clinton?
Hey, thanks, Randy. I appreciate it. That was a great overview of tokenization. Let me take some time and dig into some of the details around the specifics of EMVCo's tokenization. Next slide, please. So we'll start out with an overview of payment tokenization. We'll move into an explanation, and then finally we'll finish up with a review of some of the industry feedback we've received and some of the next steps or the evolution of EMV payment tokenization. Next slide, please. So payment tokens at a high level. You know, we have the EMV payment tokens. We've looked at tokenization from the perspective that we need something that replaces a traditional primary account number, and that's what we have with EMV payment tokens. We want to be able to restrict the use of that payment token by device, by merchant, by transaction, or what other kind of domain restriction is important for the payment ecosystem. Some of the fraudulent activity that is reduced, we look at some of the specifics around how domain controls reduce fraud. You know, we're restricting the token's use. We restrict it by a variety of scenarios. This gives us an opportunity to ensure that a token is more secure, and if it were ever to be compromised, the impact is significantly reduced. Additional fraud is prevented by the linking, mapping ability that is between the PAN and the token. If a token is compromised, we can delink it from the PAN completely. If the PAN is compromised and the new card is issued, then we can certainly keep the token in place but map it to the new PAN or payment instrument. And finally, merchants that accept the tokens, they will never have access to the full PAN unless they are the one, the entity that's actually requesting the token. Next slide, please. So looking at the evolution of tokens, we have a variety of tokens that have actually been part of the payment ecosystem for quite a while. As Randy pointed out earlier in the slide, he mentioned them as acquirer tokens and issuer tokens. And from an EMVCo perspective, we consider one kind of tokenization, EMV payment tokens, and then everything else falls into what is called non-payment tokens. And they're generally used to protect data at rest in a specific data environment. And then this traditional tokenization that's occurred for quite a while has been around for, some would say, even 20 years. It's always been used to protect the account numbers. You know, it replaces the traditional PAN with the non-payment token, and it occurs after a payment has been conducted. Basically, the idea is that if you're storing some kind of value, random value, perhaps it's you know, however the format of it's not terribly important, but the PAN itself is not being stored by the merchant, so therefore there's no opportunity for data compromise. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So examples of different types of payment tokens from an EMVCo perspective, and I think Randy went over some of these as well. And we're looking at card on file. We're looking at digital wallet. You know, some of the more advanced technologies or things that we haven't even thought of yet. We want to make sure that we give everyone the opportunity to innovate and build new payment infrastructure around new ideas. QR, barcode are just some of the examples. And of course, the most popular use case or the most well-known use case today is NFC or device-based payment initiation. And over time, we'll see the EMV chip itself perhaps having a token embedded in it, in much the same way that a PAN is today. Next slide, please. So, from a tokenization perspective and EMVCo, what is EMVCo's role for tokenization? Well, we have developed specifications. Our goal is a globally interoperable set of transactions. We want to make sure that they're secure. That's version 1. It was published in March 2014. We at EMVCo constantly reach out for industry feedback. We conduct sessions like these for educational purposes, making sure that not only does everyone understand what a payment token is, but also have opportunity to provide feedback to shape the direction and evolution of the specification over time. We want to make sure that we maintain the relationship with all of the vendors and variety of service providers to ensure that any of the changes that we make to the specification don't create an undue burden for implementation. While EMVCo does not, provide solutions or services, we do not implement. We do want to make sure that those that do have the best starting point that they can have. We basically at EMVCo do not maintain or govern the implementation requirements. We don't mandate, we don't incentivize or shape policies for EMVCo payments token solutions. We are really focused around ensuring that we have a global, interoperable specification that can be used and leveraged by a variety of constituents in innovative ways. Next slide, please. So looking at the types of payment technology, EMVCo has the EMV chip and PIN, we have EMV chip, we have payment tokenization. These are complementary payment technologies. We expect these to live side by side. Payment tokenization protects against the misuse in specific domains and specific channels. It can be used with EMV cards, it can be used with NFC devices, it can be used in a card not present environment. EMV allows secure authentication of payment applications. These two technologies are intended to work side by side, complementing each other. Let's move to the next slide, please. And next slide. So when we look at tokens, we have an idea that there was a need for them, right? We had this need to be able to have a payment instrument that was more secure than your typical PAN. EMV payment tokens, we've defined them so that they do not collide with the assigned PAN or the PAN that is mapped to the token. We want to make sure that each payment token passes basic validation rules of an account number. We want to make sure that, basically that means that the payment token can be processed and validated in much the same way that a PAN is. We want to make sure that the mapping associated with underlying PANs is available to the issuer. We want to make sure that the acceptance, the processing, the routing of tokens by any entity within the payment ecosystem is maintained. You know, that is one of the primary advantages of a payment token, is that it is processed on the existing payment infrastructure and can be treated like a payment implementation. Also, from a payment token perspective, we want to make sure that it, of course, matches the ISO messaging formats. We want to make sure that it's 13 to 19 digits. Make sure that the processing and acceptance is maintained and is a parallel with PANs today. Next slide, please. So looking at the EMV payment token attributes, there are quite a few ideas around what are payment tokens. Well, we intended them to be global. We expect them to be more secure. We expect them to minimize impact to the ecosystem. You know, that's part of the interoperability, making sure that if you process a payment token, you are not going to be impacted negatively if it's, you know, a payment token versus a PAN. And of course, supporting new participation. We want to make sure that any kind of new idea, any kind of new way of processing payments, initiating payments, tokens accentuate. It makes it better. And of course, we want to enable new channels. You know, I think that over the last few years, we've seen an explosion in the way that payments can be initiated, which channels these payments can be initiated. And tokens is expected to be complementary, to enhance, to ensure that these types of technologies are successful, while at the same time being secure. Some of the other examples of, you know, making sure that the attributes are aligned, you know, we want to make sure that tokens still follow all the regulatory obligations that are set upon typical PAN processing. We want to make sure that tokens are distinct within the payment network. We want to make sure that tokens are issued out of bin ranges that are dedicated to tokens. This is important so that tokens can be processed by a variety of entities within the payment infrastructure, and they can treat tokens uniquely from PANs. And mostly that's just to ensure that tokens have the ability to enforce the domain constraints. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So the payment system before EMV payment tokens, there were basically a variety of stakeholders or entities. You had the card holder, you have the card acceptor, very familiar with everything. We have the issuer, acquiring, and then the processing of payments, you know, with the payment network itself. When we look at what entities have been introduced by EMV payment tokenization, we have two primary entities, the token requester and the token service provider. These two entities are important. You know, it's the TSP, the token service provider, is critical in ensuring that tokens are issued, ensuring that tokens are secured, ensuring that when a token is issued, the right level of security is conducted. It's up to the token requester in many cases to ensure that the proper levels of identification occur. So these two entities, while they're not the only two new entities, these are the primary entities that are part of EMV payment tokenization. Let's move to the next slide, please. Getting back to the interoperability, or the making sure that tokens are processed as bins and pans, there's a variety of rules that we can put in place to ensure that the mapping between token and pan is maintained. We want to make sure that the tokens maintain product attributes, so that it's clear that if a token represents a debit product versus some other type of product. Making sure also that the storage and management of tokens is maintained at the TSP level. The TSP is the primary entity that's mapping tokens to PAN. They are the ones that need to manage the bin ranges, and they're essentially issuing tokens on behalf of the PAN bin range owner. And of course, TSPs may be managed by either the card issuer, a payment network, or some other authorized third party. These third parties are effectively going to possibly provide token services to issuers or any other entity that needs a TSP service. Next slide, please. So, some of the related data associated with payment tokens. There's a lot of data, and if you go to the EMVCo website and download the specification, there's a significant amount of data that is available at a specification level. So we obviously have the payment token itself, which is the surrogate value for the PAN. You have the token expiry date, which is the corresponding expiration date that's similar to the PAN. A token's expiration date does not necessarily have to be the same as the PAN itself, and actually could be used as part of a domain constraint to say limit the token's lifetime. You have the token requester ID. This is an important piece of data in that it tells the TSP which token requester is requesting a token. The token requester ID is also important from a token requester perspective because it defines the relationship between the token requester and the token that it is specifically requesting, meaning that each token requester ID represents the token requester and a set of domain constraints for a particular token. A token requester may have a variety of token requester IDs representing different security levels. You have a token cryptogram, which may be included in some transactions, and typically the cryptogram is going to be at a transaction level. You also have the assurance level, insurance data for tokens. And these are provided by the token requester. Someone's capturing this identification data, and some entity is verifying that data to establish an assurance level. The token requester indicator is used during the identification and verification process only. Let's move on to the next slide. So, identification and verification. We've looked at the assurance level from a data element perspective. Tokens are unique in that they have a way of identifying and verifying the card holder at the time of a token issuance. So if the card issuer is providing the identification and verification, then we would consider that the highest level of assurance. If other third parties are providing identification, but the issuer is verifying it, that's still a fairly high level of assurance. But you can consider any amount of variation, right? So there's some level of identifying and verifying, and different levels of security around this. Good IND, ID&V, revolves around ensuring that there's multiple parties, making sure that there's multiple entities, not only conducting the identification phase, but possibly also verifying that data. The card issuers and payment networks can definitely adjust and modify their risk analytics based off of the assurance level. In fact, even assurance level can be redefined based off of the specification. Let's move on to the next slide, please. At a high level, we're looking at the token request here. This is a simple diagram showing three entities: the token requester, the TSP, and the card issuer. And basically what we have is a situation where a token is being introduced into the payment ecosystem. The token requester has somehow acquired a payment instrument, a PAN, an expiration date, etc. So they'll send that information to the TSP requesting a token. The TSP, in coordination with the card issuer, will ensure that the identification data that was provided has been verified and then associated with the token. So the token is going to have a set of constraints that secure its ability to be processed for authorization. It's also going to have an assurance level that defines how when the token was issued, what level of identification and verification was conducted. Once the TSP has associated the token to the PAN, basically it'll pass the EMV payment token back to the token requester, and that is, at that point in time, the token requester can use that to conduct any sort of payment transaction that they would typically have done with a traditional PAN. And of course, these slides are illustrative. They're examples. There's many different ways that these entities can work with each other. Let's move to the next slide, please. So if we look at the authorization step, it's very similar to a typical authorization using PAN. The only real difference is that at some point in time, one of these entities within the payment ecosystem will need to reach out to a TSP and detokenize, take the token, convert it into a PAN, and process it for fraud reasons, for credit risk reasons, for any kind of reason that is needed. And that TSP can sit anywhere, right? It's not specifically an issuer technology. It's not an acquirer technology. It is simply the TSP. Let's move on to the next slide, please, and then skip one more. So here we'll start digging into some of the common information that we have around tokenization. A lot of feedback that has been received by the tokenization working group revolved around ensuring that innovation was still available, right? We wanted to make sure that the specification, the technical framework itself, provided enough flexibility within its definitions so that it didn't prevent interoperability. We wanted to make sure that emerging solutions, emerging technology could leverage tokenization, ensuring that payment infrastructure is maintained from a security perspective while all of this innovation is going on. And we see within the last few years, and I'm sure everyone here can predict that over the next few years, the level of innovation around payments is going to blossom. So tokenization is a very simple, flexible system that's globally interoperable that allows new payment styles to emerge and maintain security. Now, we've received a lot of feedback that we need to make sure that the current specifications are maintained. Of course, with the TSPs we've talked a little bit about, we want to make sure that those entities have the ability to issue tokens on behalf of a variety of authorized entities. And basically, we want to make sure that over time, tokenizations may be deployed into the EMV chips themselves on cards and plastic. Let's move to the next slide, please. So as we were talking before, you know, as far as new entities, we know that the TSP is one of the new entities. Part of the process around maintaining TSPs is ensuring that we have a way of tracking globally which TSPs represent which bin ranges. This is important for token requesters to be able to know who is the appropriate entity for requesting a token. The token request, the TSP, will all have a TSP code. It's a 3-digit number. It's part of the token requester ID. We'll have a registration process that's going to be online here soon. and it allows third parties to create their own token service providers or services and offer them up to anybody who needs a service of providing tokens. Let's move to the next slide, please. Here I'll get into one of the newer, or I guess you can say not necessarily newer, but we've been working on a solution for the last year around tokens mapping back to payment accounts. Oh, let's go back to the slide. Yep, here we go. We'll stay on this slide, please. So the tokens that we have out in the industry now, right, they're out there. We have a variety of ways that tokens can be acquired by a merchant or anyone else. We have known that there is a need for merchants to conduct pre-authorization fraud checks. We know that there are needs for people to conduct anti-money laundering, merchants who need to conduct receiptless returns, transit ticketing, any situation where a transaction occurred using the PAN, and then later a transaction is occurring using a token, or vice versa. Right now, there's no simple way for merchants to link these two together to create a historical representation of a token and a PAN. So the specification for payment tokens that we have now, version 1, the technical framework, we very diligently avoid data leakage. If we have a PAN that's being stored with the token's effectiveness is reduced. So we want to make sure that if we have a solution to mapping PANs and tokens, that solution does not include the PAN itself. So there must be something else. There must be some other data element which allows merchants or other entities to link a variety of tokens back to one payment account, as long as that payment account is referenced by one PAN. Let's move to the next slide, please. So PAR, payment account reference. It's the data element that allows us to link multiple tokens back to one payment account, one PAN. Feedback from the industry that we've heard is it should not look like a PAN, right? It should be obvious that that it is not a payment instrument. It should also be generated in a variety of different ways. There should be no way to generate a PAR and then have that PAR distributed and have some way of reverse engineering that back to the PAN itself. Also, we need to make sure that the PAR is available at a variety of times within the transaction. It should be available before the transaction, it should be available during the transaction, and it should be available after. And it should not put an undue burden on hardware terminals. We shouldn't have to have any changes, other than possibly software upgrades so that they can read PAR off of an embedded data element. So some of the principles around PAR. It must be unique across payment networks and all the network entities. Right? We want to make sure that there are no duplicate PAR values which would accidentally link multiple tokens to different payment accounts. Each token must be unique to the PAN, not the cardholder. In other words, PAR is not a card member, it's not a cardholder reference. This is a reference to the PAN. So if a payment account had multiple PANs, then that payment account would have one PAR for each PAN. Unique to the PAN, not the cardholder. It must exist outside of the TSP environment. It must be available to anyone who needs the typical processing of PAN. Right? So PAR must be available. Otherwise, its effectiveness is not very good. And again, I'll say it again, it should not be reverse engineered to get the PAN. Since PAR is a non-financial instrument, it is a piece of data that should be stored freely. It shouldn't be considered a data security. So we want to make sure that it cannot be used to generate PAN. Otherwise, its effectiveness is broken. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So PAR by itself, looking at the format, we have a 27 length element. We have 2, which are the network identifier. These will be assigned by EMVCo. Then we have 25 characters that follow. The whole PAR is comprised of 2 characters, and each can be uppercase, Roman alphanumeric, and also 0 through 9. So it's a very large data element, which gives us a lot of growing room into the future. Some of the work that's been completed around PAR, we've published the PAR draft bulletin in May. We've worked with the internal teams within EMVCo to ensure that there are tags reserved for storing PAR on chips. We've worked with ISO working groups to ensure that PAR is defined in ISO messages, whether it be different versions of 8583. We've also collected a huge amount of feedback on PAR. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So looking at EMVCo and the history of tokenization, in 2013, there was an excellent team who defined the payment tokens specification. They worked diligently, with multiple industry bodies to ensure that, tokenization was going to solve, this problem around, emerging payments and ensuring that we have something like a token that is available to ensure that new payment technologies are secure. They've defined that. Then over the course of the year, 2013 moving into 2014, they basically refined that, making sure that all of the data elements were defined. Then they published it in 2014 in March. Since then, the Tokenization Working Group has had a variety of interactions with the industry. We've had advisor meetings. We've worked with the PCI SSC. We've had technical associate meetings. We've worked with the Federal Reserve, U.S. Federal Reserve, to define white papers. We've had even seminars like we're having today, webinars. We've been working with the industry not only to provide education but to collect feedback. And this has been an ongoing process, and it will continue to occur for quite a long time. Let's move to the next slide, please. So with EMVCo, our roadmap, the rest of this year we're focusing on ensuring that the TSP registration process is published and released. There's a variety of third-party TSPs out there that want to get their services up and running, and they need a TSP code as soon as possible. We understand that. We're working as hard as we can. We're also looking at releasing the PAR Special Bulletin in December, making sure that we have the final definition of PAR, the best solution that we have now for mapping tokens to payment account references, to payment accounts as identified by PAN. Moving into 2016, we'll finalize some other changes to the specification itself, integrating PAR, clarifying some of the misconceptions around payment tokenization, as well as expanding the use cases. Of course, these timelines are provisional at this time and may change with complications in the industry. Let's move to the next slide, please. So from an EMVCo perspective, we work with the industry leaders. We understand that, being part of EMVCo gives a number of benefits. This is important, so that if anyone who is not currently a member, not currently an associate, is thinking about it, it's definitely worth the time. There's a lot of inside access. We have access, we're engagement. You're able to connect with the executive committee within EMVCo, with the board of managers, and all the working groups. Having that access is critical. That access gives you the insight. You learn more about what's coming up. You learn how the program itself works. You know, with access and insight, gives you the influence. And once you have the ability to, know where the direction of EMVCo is going, you then can provide all the feedback. You can contribute. Specifications, you can look at them, you can say, this specification may have an error. You give us the feedback, we fix it. With that, you have the foresight. You have the ability to plan your own success. You're receiving advanced updates on EMV specifications, all the amendments, which gives you the ability to plan your business more successfully and be more competitive. So as a suggestion, do visit the EMVCo website. It is worthwhile to participate. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. And again, the EMVCo website is up and running, as it is for years and years. Please do, go there and take a look around. And I would just like to read it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide an overview of tokenization. And I'll turn it back over to Randy. Thank you.
Great, terrific job, Clinton, and thank you for that excellent presentation. So just as a wrap-up to what you heard today, hopefully today's webinar has been helpful for you in understanding the multi-layered approaches to security and how tokens are providing added security across the existing and future payment domains, and the work that EMVCo is doing in order to help define those tokens so that they can be universally accepted and adopted from many providers' perspectives. Before we get to your questions, I just wanted to call to your attention the following events and resources that are available for follow-up to this webinar. One is that the Smart Card Alliance Payment Summit, which is the main payments conference we put on for the course of the year, will be held April 5th and through 7th in Orlando, Florida, and would encourage you to mark your calendars for that event. Also, there are a number of resources available both on the EMVCo site and the Smart Card Alliance site, as well as resources about EMV on the EMV Connection website and gochipcard.com site. In particular, this presentation was based on a white paper that the Smart Card Alliance produced called Technologies for Payment Fraud Prevention, EMV, Encryption, and Tokenization. I would encourage you to find that website and that paper for future reference purposes. Next slide. So we have a few minutes available for Q&A, and then I'll have a final closing point to make to you. So let's get started here with the first few questions that we have. And Clinton, you seem to be the star here, so I think you're going to be asked to answer most of these questions, if that's okay with you. First one is actually, why are we calling this an EMV token? We've heard other names used, and EMVCo spec is referring to this as an EMV token. So could you clarify the naming convention for us?
Yeah, so we specifically call out token that's used on the payment, as a payment token, an EMV payment token. This is for two reasons. One, it distinguishes that this was a token created based off of the EMVCo payment tokenization specification. And second, that as a payment token, it is distinct in that it is, can be used as a initiator for a payment. Right? A lot of the tokens out there, broadly across the industry, cannot be used to initiate payment tokens outside of the channel that, cannot be used to initiate payment outside of the channel by which the token was issued. Right? Typically, they're not payment instruments. So our naming convention, EMV payment token, is very specific. It provides two pieces of information. One, that it's EMV based off of EMVCo, and second, that it is intended to be used in the payment infrastructure today. I think, is there another part of that question, or did I capture all the details there?
No, you did capture it. So it's really to clarify, because tokenization is really a generic term, and it's going to be used and implemented by others other than specifically associated with EMV and payments, and I think that was a great explanation of that. This next question has to do with the number of possible combinations of tokens that may be available in future years, since we can easily envision that that there will be more tokens issued than there are PANs associated with those tokens. Is there a concern that we won't be able to support the number of potential tokens in the future, and has EMVCo looked into this issue?
So let's just see if I can reflect the question back first. And you know, if we're looking at part of the specification, part of the principles around EMV payment tokenization is that it is it is interoperable. It is also something that can be processed on the existing payment infrastructure. This leads us to this question here, which is using our existing bin range methodology, using the existing bins that are available, do we have enough room to continue to issue tokens and process them? Or do we foresee that potentially there is a point in time where they're just all of the bin ranges, all of the bins themselves are exhausted with the overusage of tokenization or something like that? I would say that it's very implementation specific. There's a lot of different ways to handle the problems of depleting available ranges within a bin. So I don't think that it's a specific problem that EMVCo has addressed, merely because from a specification perspective, our goal is to ensure that the tokens that are with EMVCo specifications are able to be processed on the existing payment infrastructure. It would be up to the TSPs, up to the card issuers to ensure that the bin ranges that are available and the bin ranges that tokens are being issued out of, those token bins, have sufficient room to grow over time. So the quick answer to this question is no, this is not a topic for EMVCo, but perhaps there's an angle to this that we haven't seen. But ultimately, we do look at this as a problem that can be solved by the TSPs and the card issuers that they support.
Okay. So perhaps for the merchants on the call today, can you discuss how merchants can get more involved in EMVCo, and particularly how it relates to the definition of tokenization specifications?
Yeah, I mean the simplest thing is to to visit the EMVCo website. There's a variety of opportunities to engage, to participate. Being as merchants, there's certainly a broad set of opportunities to engage with EMVCo directly. As we were pointing out on one of the last slides, getting that access, getting that insight allows us to, as merchants, allows you to, better plan for, some of the different changes to the payment infrastructure, payment systems coming up. Specifically around tokens, there's a lot of interest around PAR. PAR is as a draft is published now on the EMVCo website. It's worthwhile if you haven't gone through it and you're a merchant, planning to use PAR in place of PAN, to go to the website and download that draft specification in anticipation of final publication in December. I think I answered that one. If I missed a particular point, let me know.
Thank you. A large number of transactions to least cost routing options. Tokens miss this information. So do we need some way to identify the card type?
So tokens aren't created to solve that. It would be up to the card issuer to ensure that the bin range that those tokens are being issued out of give the those multiple payment networks the information and the merchants the information to determine which payment network is appropriate for token. From a specification perspective, I think that is something that is outside of the scope, and we'll leave it up to the card issuers to manage their bin ranges appropriately.
And Clinton, when does EMVCo plan to issue an updated version of its technical specifications?
So there's two. There's the bulletin that we plan to release in December, which will include the specifics around PAR. We also plan to have the actual technical framework updated in Q2 of 2016.
Okay, we have time for one more question for you. Is EMVCo considering certification of EMV tokenization implementations similar to the way PCI SSC certifies PIN pads according to their specifications?
So the quick answer to that is no. We're not planning to do any certification. We're not planning to do any testing. If someone is implementing a token service, it's up to PCI is working on a data protection definition for token services. I could imagine that the issuers themselves will have a set of requirements as well as likely payment networks. The current specification and EMVCo will not be certifying or testing token service implementations. We're just interested in making sure that it's a globally interoperable specification that allows entities to innovate on top of. We don't want to restrict them in any way. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Clinton. And if we could just go to the next slide, please. So copies of the presentation and the audio recording will be uploaded to a website, and you'll receive a notice with a link and a password to that content. Once you receive that, we encourage you to share that information with your colleagues and your customers. And so on behalf of Clinton and myself and our organizations, EMVCo and the Smart Card Alliance, I thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.